Yeah, let's get going then. So last time we were talking about the Mi'raj of the Sheikh Al-Akbar, and he went on a farewell tour saying goodbye to his previous teachers and the previous saints that he knew in Andalusia. So now the rest of his life will be dedicated to traveling, and he will be a perennial wayfarer, um, which is, I think, the true reality of each of us and each human being. Uh, if you excuse me for just 1 second, I'm going to try and fix the internet here. I apologize. Let me just end this presentation in 1 second. I apologize for that. Let me just fix one thing. Yeah, so we were the Mi'raj that he had. Yeah, okay. Excellent. Thank you for your patience. Okay. We were talking about the Mirage he had and his teachers he was bidding farewell to. So this is the continuation of his journey. And in a sense, we're all perennial travelers. So I think it's very fitting to see Ibn Arabi in this kind of mode where he is going to travel to various Islamic lands for the rest of his life. And so his next stop is to Cairo in Egypt. And so the Sheikh Al Akbar joins the caravan route that goes to Mecca for the annual Hajj pilgrimage. And so the next stop is Egypt. And then after Egypt, he actually goes to Palestine as well. So he makes a detour to Palestine, if you like, before he finishes off at Mecca. Having arrived in Cairo, the Sheikh Al Akbar makes his way to an institutional hostel um, for the Sufis specifically, which is designed by the Ayyubids. And so there is this gathering of many like-minded Sufis. But to the Sheikh Al Akbar's disappointment, uh, he actually realized that they were not like-minded at all. And so his disappointment was immense. So he says, I was led to a group assembled in a convent located in a grand and spacious building. But I noticed that their greatest concern and their primary preoccupation was cleaning their frocks, or should I say their uniforms, and combing their beards. This organized Sufi community was completely different from the kind of teachers that we see he met in Andalusia, this fluid, mystical universe, which was completely devoid of decorum, which he knew in the West, and where you see these masters living without any sort of formalities or pretenses whatsoever. For Ibn Arabi, the search for God was a silent journey of a soul in search of the divine presence in the most secret parts of itself. And so here in Cairo, he comes to meet with one of his teachers and friends, Sheikh Ahmed al Hariri, and his brother al Khayat. And these are people he has known since his childhood in Andalusia. And so he catches up with them again in Cairo in the year 1207 or 603 of the Hijri reckoning. So then he tells us that when they were in the process of doing dhikr, uh, the Sheikh Ahmed al-Hariri was overcome by a state that he was unable to bear. And so he tells us what happened there. And so he says, let us return to the subject of the one who has unveiling, and when he has unveiling, he becomes frightened and flees back to the world of witnessing, which was prior to that unveiling. One such person was our companion Ahmed al-Asad al-Hariri. When he was taken, he would quickly return to his senses, shaking and trembling. I used to scold him and tell him not to do that, but he would say, I am frightened and terrified that my entity, my ayn, will become non-existent because of what I see. But then the Shaykh Al-Akbar rebukes him and says, if only the poor man knew that were he to depart from his physical matter, the breath would return to its original source, its resting place, which is his true entity, right? Because our true home is nothingness, if you like. It's al-adam. That is where our true ubudiyya resides. And so the Shaykh Al-Akbar says, the person who has an unveiling, especially a strong unveiling, if he were to have one atom or 1 ounce of ego left in his personality, even a tiny fraction, what you would call 1 atom of rububiyya, 1 ounce of lordship, then he will be unable to bear this unveiling. And then he flees, returns back to the world, hoping to grasp that sense of identity back. So then he also tells us a story with the same sheikh, mind you, and he has a lot of good things to say about the sheikh, even if he comes across as being critical of some of his teachers at times. So this is what he tells us. One day, this sheikh Abu al-Abbas al-Hariri was walking with another sheikh, Abu Abdullah al-Qarabaqi. And one day he was walking with him in the markets of Wardan, and this sheikh, al-Qarabaqi, had purchased a small pot for his little son to urinate in. So he needed it for the bathroom for his son. So along the way, they went into a house with Abu Abdullah still carrying the new pot, where they met a group of righteous men. They wanted something to eat, and so the pot was still clean, and they were looking around the room for something they could have with bread. So they agreed that they could buy what is called some qutrat al-sukkar, which is liquid sugar with honey. They then said this pot has never been used and is completely new, so they could use it for now and pour the liquid sugar honey into it. Then they sat down to eat until they had finished, after which everyone left, and the owner of the pot walked off with his pot beside Abu al-Abbas. So Abu al-Abbas told me, Wallahi, by God, I heard this with my own ears, and so did Abu Abdullah al-Qarabaqi. We both heard the pot speak. And what did it say? It said, after the friends of God, the awliya, have eaten from me, shall I then become a vessel for filth? By God, this shall not happen. Whereupon it leapt out of his hands, fell to the ground, and broke, which is a really strange story. And then Abu al-Abbas said, we were both overcome by a spiritual state because of what had been said by the pot. When Abu al-Abbas, that is al-Hariri, told me this, I said something else. So now Ibn al-Arabi is speaking. He said, you have overlooked the real point of the pot's exhortation to you. The matter is not as you thought. For how many a pot has been eaten from by people better than you, and then used for filth afterwards? What the pot told you was this, my brothers, after God has made your hearts a receptacle for his knowledge and self-revelation, you must not make them vessels for other things. God does not prevent you from being his vessel. Then it broke apart, and that is how you should be with God. In other words, broken-hearted, just as that pot was broken. And then Abu al-Abbas told me that they had not taken into account what I had alerted them to. And so these are the people of unveiling, al-kashaf, who can hear the utterances of all existent things, be they inanimate objects, plants, or animals. So then Shaykh Al-Akbar says, for according to us, there is nothing in existence that is silent at all. Everything is speaking in praise of God, but you don't hear it with your physical ears, but they are actually speaking whatever it is that's around you. So then Ibn al-Arabi arrives um, to Al-Fustat, right, which is still Cairo, the old Al-Qahira. And what he found, um, besides the place he went to with the other Sufis, whom he did not approve of, what he found was a country ravaged and decimated by one of the greatest famines it had ever known. A large portion of the population had perished, and there were mass immigrations to the Maghreb, to Syria, to the Hijaz, and Yemen to escape this disaster. Um, so we are entering a slightly darker period in the life of the Shaykh al-Akbar. So then he continues, those who were unable to leave apparently resorted to cannibalism, according to the historical chroniclers. And then so one of them says, in those times, it became normal to invite one's best friend to dinner at one's home and then cut his throat. People did the same with doctors. They called for them, pretending that they wanted them to examine someone who was sick. Then they killed them and ate them. Alongside this dramatic testimony, we have the reaction of, again, Ibn al-Arabi's own friend, the aforementioned Abu al-Abbas Ahmad al-Hariri. And this was his reaction, evoked by the sight of the corpses littering the ground. One day, as he was walking along, he saw some babies that were dying of hunger and cried out, O Lord, what does this mean? The reply came, O my servant, have I ever abandoned you? Certainly not, he said. Then God replies, well, then don't protest. The infants you see are the fruit of adultery. And as for the adults, they have transgressed my laws. As a consequence, I have inflicted my sanctions upon them, so don't be concerned. And these words appeased him. And from then on, he accepted how things were for people. So it was really hard times, and even more difficult times were actually on their way. So after leaving Egypt, Ibn al-Arabi passes through Palestine, visiting the holy places, so the maqamat of the Anbiya, and yes, uh, and he would have then arrived in Mecca in time for the Hajj pilgrimage. When first arriving, Ibn Arabi's voice would have joined the voice of all the other pilgrims, the Hajjaj, in crying out, Here I am, Lord, all yours. Labbaik Allahumma labbaik. In spiritual geography, Mecca is the center of the earth, its navel, the heart of the universe, and this is where Ibn Arabi would find himself consecrated by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as the seal of Muhammadan sainthood. And so, if you recall in the previous episodes, he first has a vision announcing his uh, his I guess the office of seal of Muhammadan sainthood in Cordoba. Then he has the Mi'raj, where he actually attains to a position and knowledge of being the seal of Muhammadan sainthood. And then finally, this is the actual, if you might call it, ceremony, this actual consecration that happens in the imaginal world, في العالم الخيال, في العالم الخيال. And so the Shaykh Al-Akbar describes it, and this is actually in the opening book to, this is in the opening passages to his book, the Futuhat al-Makkiyah. So this is what he says. I saw the Prophet ﷺ in this imaginal world, sovereign, quite unapproachable, protected from every gaze or glance, aided and assisted. The messengers stood by him according to their rank. His community, which is the best of communities, surrounded him. The angels of dominion stood around the throne of his station, and the angels created by men's actions were ranged in front of him. And then he calls each of the main four Khulafa Rashidun, the Sahaba, by their titles. So the voracious, the Siddiq, who's Abu Bakr, was seated on his sublime right. And then Al-Faruq, who was Umar, was on his holy left. And then the seal, because remember, there's also the seal of universal sainthood, who is Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam. So Sayyidina Isa, Jesus, was squatting in front of him and speaking to him about the history of women. And at the same time, Ali, and then Sheikh Al-Akbar uses a strange formula. He says, alayhi salam, or sallallahu alayhi salam, about Ali, was interpreting in his own language the words spoken by Jesus. And then the possessor of two lights, Dhul Nurayn, who Sayyidina Uthman, was wearing the cloak of his modesty, he stood in front as was his custom. And so I think like it's not coincidental you find those four Sahaba, the Khulafa al-Rashidun, in that ceremony, um, which speaks to degree the degree of importance of that ceremony. So then he says, then looking around, the Prophet saw me behind the seal of universal sainthood. I was standing there because of the similarity between his status and mine. Why is it a similar status? Because they're both seals. One is the seal of Muhammadan sainthood, the other is the seal of universal sainthood. But he's standing also behind Jesus because Jesus is a prophet and Sheikh Al-Akbar is only an inheritor. So that puts him behind Jesus as well. So there's a very precise arrangement to this choreography. And then the Prophet Muhammad says to Ibn al-Arabi, or rather he says to Jesus, this man is your equal, your son and your friend. He's your equal in sainthood, not in prophethood, because Ibn Arabi is not a prophet. So he's your equal in sainthood, your son and your friend. Draw up for him in front of me the seat of tamarisk. He then gestured to me and said, rise up, Muhammad. That means Ibn Arabi, take your place on this seat and sing the praises of he who sent me, and mine as well. Because in you, there is a part of me. It's actually in Arabic, it's a sha'r, it's a piece of hair. There's a part of me that can no longer bear to be away from me. It is that sha'r, it is that portion which governs your innermost reality. And so then Ibn al-Arabi, he ascends the steps. But what happens is that Rasulullah, he places his sleeve on the steps, which is a mark that this station is not accessible except through him. So there's a certain hurma that's given to the Prophet Muhammad. So then the seal drew up the seat on the solemn spot. That means Jesus drew up the seat for Ibn Arabi. On the top of it, the following words were inscribed in blue light. This is the purest of the Muhammadan stations. He who seats himself upon it is his heir. He has been sent by God to preserve the Sharia, to preserve the sacred law. In that moment, I was granted the gifts of wisdoms, which I think is Mawahib al-Hikam. Mawahib al-Hikam. And it was as if the all-comprehensive words had been bestowed upon me. What does that mean? Because one of the 6 gifts given to the Prophet Muhammad, which was not given to any other prophet before him, one of them was Jawami al-Kalam. So the Prophet Muhammad was granted the Jawami al-Kalam, which in summary could be said to mean that he was able to contain a great number of meanings in few words. The all-comprehensive words. All the meanings could be contained in the words that he spoke. But really it's more than that. It is that all the haqa'iq are contained, all the realities are contained in the words of the Prophet Muhammad. And so analogously, Ibn Arabi is granted the Muwahib al-Hikam, the totalities of all the wisdoms that are the prerogative and the gift of the seal of Muhammadan sainthood. But it needs to be emphasized that Ibn Arabi is not claiming to have surpassed the Prophet or any other prophet. He is only an inheritor. Even as exalted and sublime as that station is, he is just an inheritor. So he confirms this for us when he says, when as one of the wasilun of my time, he calls himself one of the wasilun. That means one of those who arrives to the divine presence at the end of the spiritual journey. As one of the wasilun of my time, I in turn arrived at this divine gate. I found it open and without either guard or doorkeeper. I remained there until I had been reclothed in the robe of honor of the prophetic legacy. I then caught sight of a closed skylight. I was then going to knock on it. Then I was told, there's no point in knocking. It will not open. But why is it there then, I asked. I was told, that is the skylight of the prophets and messengers. when the religion had been made perfect and was finished, it was bolted shut. That skylight was bolted shut. It was bolted shut because that's the skylight of wahi, revelation, which is shut after the coming and the demise of the Prophet Muhammad. It was through this door that the prophets were cloaked in the robes of honor of the laws. So the law, the Sharia and the Sharia descend through that skylight. So it's closed because there is no other Sharia that's going to descend till the end of time. Okay. It was also, so that's why no spiritual individual can claim to bring a new law because that skylight of revelation is shut. Okay. It was also here in Mecca that Ibn Arabi encounters a mysterious individual. And it is one of the most important encounters. So he says, to the sides of the Kaaba is a black stone. Or rather, he actually doesn't say this. So here to the side of the Kaaba is the black stone. It's the point where the pilgrim begins and ends his circulation, the tawaf, going around the Kaaba. It was at that point that Ibn Arabi encounters the Fatah, the young man, or you might call him the chivalrous hero. So he says, while I was completing the circulations, the tawaf, just as I found myself in front of the black stone, I encountered the radiant young man. And then he starts talking in paradoxes, and oxymorons, and opposites. The silent interlocutor, he who is neither living nor dead. He who is simple and complex. He who is enveloped and envelops. Then God made me know the dignity, in other words, the rank of this young man, and his transcendence in relation to where and why. When I understood his rank in existence and his state, I kissed his right hand and wiped the perspiration of inspiration from his forehead, and I stated, look upon him who aspires to your company and longs for your intimacy. So he answered me back, but by signs and enigmas, that he had been created in such a manner that he never spoke except by symbols. He made a gesture, and I understood. The reality of his beauty was unveiled for me, and I was overwhelmed by love. And then I was drained of strength and instantly fell to the ground. When I regained consciousness, my ribs still quaking with fear, he knew that I had understood who he was. He said, take note of the details of my composition and the arrangement of my form. I am knowledge, the known and the knower. I am sapience. Sapience is wisdom. I am wisdom, the wise work, and the sage and the wise one. I am the mature orchard and the total harvest. Now lift up my veils and read what my inscriptions contain. What you see in me, put down in your book and preach it to all your friends. And so Ibn Arabi also describes this young hero, this Fatah, as having blue light, blue, like almost like blue tattoos, but made of light, tattooed all over this chivalrous hero's body. And so Ibn Arabi literally reads those inscriptions, and what is born is the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, his most important work, his magnum opus, which is born here in Mecca, but then is written for the next for the next set of many years, maybe decades, until the time of his death. And so it's written over the years. But this is the original point of revelation of that book, which contains the summary of all the ulum Islamiyya, the Islamic sciences that are passed down to the entire ummah for the past 560 years prior to his birth. He himself, Ibn Arabi, was born in the year 560 of the Hijri year. And so in the Futuhat, you've got 560 chapters. Make of that what you will, summarizing the entire history of Islamic knowledge. But it's not a summary. It is actually a sacred repository saved for people like us in our own times So it functions as a safina, a ship, like Safinat Noah, the ship of Noah, who transfers humanity to the next stage and saves them from the flood. This book saves the Islamic sciences for our darker times and ages. And so it contains not just the Islamic sciences, but the divine secrets and the divine sciences of the saints. Who is this Fata, this chivalrous hero? No one really knows, but I will tell you the speculations. So one person, I think it's Henry Corbin, says that this could be Ibn Arabi's celestial twin, his alter ego, but from heaven. A second opinion is that this is Ibn Arabi's own Ain Thabita, his immutable entity manifested to him. There's a third opinion which I prefer, but it's but I don't know if I can say it's authoritative, but I prefer this opinion from Michel Chodskovitz, and it's actually a tajalli, a divine self-manifestation of the divine name al-mutakallam, the speaker. So it's actually Allah Himself, but in His capacity and in His self-disclosure as the speaker, al-mutakallam. So, from the very being of this young man, the paradoxical epiphany of him who speaks, but whose word is beyond sounds, Ibn Arabi's book has nourished generations of Muslims from the East and the West, from Asia to Africa. This encyclopedia is an important gift to the Ummah, that is the Muhammadan community, which for Ibn Arabi includes all of humanity. And that's not all. Ibn Arabi had another vision that seemed to confirm his status as the Muhammadan sainthood, um, which is this. And we came across it for those who are taking the class on false sheath. I had a vision concerning myself and took it as glad tidings from God, since it had a similarity to a tradition of the Prophet Muhammad in which he indicates his position in relation to the other prophets. He said, as regards myself and the prophets, so this is from the hadith, it is as if a man builds a wall leaving out one brick. I am that brick, and there will be no messenger or prophet after me. That's the metaphor. So here he likens prophethood to the wall and the prophets to the bricks, which make it up. Um, it is an extremely beautiful analogy, because although it is called a wall, this only happens because of the bricks which make it up. Thus, he's the seal of the prophets. So then Sheikh Al-Akbar says, when I was in Mecca in the year 1202, I had a dream in which I saw the Kaaba built of bricks of silver and gold placed alternately. I really tried my hardest to make an image of this, but I couldn't get it right. From anyways, if anyone wants to make that image, that would be a fantastic image. The construction was complete, and there was nothing left to add. I contemplated it and admired its beauty. Then I turned to the side. I noticed there were two bricks missing, one gold, one silver, on two rows of wall. The missing gold was on the upper row, and the missing silver was on the lower end. I saw myself being put into the place of these two bricks. I was the two bricks. With them, the wall was complete and the Kaaba faultless. I was standing up, observing, and quite conscious that I was in a standing position. But at the same time, I knew without the slightest doubt that I was those two bricks, and those two bricks were me. Then I woke up and gave thanks to God, saying to myself, I am to the followers my kind, as the messenger is to the prophets. It's that simple. And that is the analogy of the seal of Muhammadan sainthood. And there's so much more to say about it. So I don't want to take up all our time on the subject, but there is a lot to say about it. But just very briefly, the silver brick represents the exoteric outward knowledge, which is the knowledge of the Sharia, the law. But the golden brick, which is esoteric knowledge, represents the interior knowledge that is mystical, saintly knowledge. So the seal of sainthood does not just complete the treasure and heritage of sainthood, he himself is the source of all sainthood. This is to such an extent, right? And it will require further elaboration for another time. But it is to such an extent that even the sainthood of the prophets themselves comes from what is called the mishkat, the niche of the seal of Muhammad's sainthood himself. The prophets, insofar as they themselves are saints, derive their sainthood from the seal of Muhammadan sainthood, but not their prophethood. Their prophethood derives from the Mishkat Nubuwa, which comes from the niche of the Prophet Muhammad. So towards the end of the Islamic year in 1202, Ibn Arabi meets a woman who was to inspire his finest poems. And this is, of course, in Mecca. Night had fallen, and in the grip of ecstasy, Ibn Arabi started performing the tawaf, the circulation around the Kaaba, while at the same time composing verses at the top of his voice. So he says, would that I were aware whether they knew what heart they possessed, and would that my heart knew what mountain pass they threaded. Do you deem them safe, or do you deem them dead? Lovers lose their way in love and become entangled. So then when suddenly he became aware of a presence by his side, all I felt was a light tap on my shoulder, made by the gentlest of hands. I turned around and saw a young woman, one of the daughters of Greece. Never have I witnessed a face that was more graceful or a speech that was so pleasant, intelligent, subtle, and spiritual. She surpassed the people of her age in her discernment, her erudition, her beauty, and her knowledge. She said to me, "Oh, master, what did you just say?" So one by one, Ibn Arabi repeated to her the verses he recited, and one by one, she completely demolishes them. When I say demolish, I mean she critiques them savagely. She critiques them completely, telling him why those verses aren't really well written and make no sense. So Ibn Arabi, he's not offended. He's pleasantly surprised by, by her. And so he asks for her name, and she replies, Qurat al-Ain, freshness of the eyes. And then Ibn Arabi, without blinking, just replies to her, for me, li, freshness of the eyes for me. And then she tells him that her name is Nizam, meaning harmony. And so Nizam would be to Ibn Arabi, according to Claude Adas, in his passion poetry, what Beatrice was to Dante. Now, there is an opinion, I think it's by Pablo Benito, that this Nizam is actually just a tajalli, a self-disclosure of the divine beauty to Ibn Arabi, or it's actually a tajalli of the Kaaba herself. I'm more inclined to think that Nizam is an actual person, but you could interpret it either way. Years later, she would be responsible for Ibn Arabi's poetry work. His major work of poetry, which is called Tarjuman al-Ashwaq, the interpreter of desires. Written in the form of love poems, broken hearts and yearning, Ibn Arabi uses the language of love to convey spiritual truths. But so naturally, he gets accused by the jurists and the doctors of the law of using mystical poetry as an excuse to write erotica, because these poems get disseminated. So he has to write a commentary and turn explain what he meant. It's thanks to Nizam that we have these famous lines of poetry, which everyone knows, whoever knows anything about the subject, which is about a garden amidst the flames. My heart takes on any form, a meadow for ghazals, a convent for Christian monks, a temple for idols, and the pilgrim's Kaaba, the tables of the Torah, and the book of the Quran. I follow the religion of love, which he explains in his commentary is the religion of Muhammad, his path. Whatever way love's caravans take, that is my religion and my faith. The religion of the lovers, which is of course also the religion of Maulana Rumi, this divine love. Yeah, so when Ibn Arabi writes his commentary, he actually attends a semi-public hearing, inviting not just a critic, but a group of lawyers, and explains the verses to them with his own commentary, verse by verse, in order to defend himself. Literally, this is Ibn Arabi's viva, his viva voce, right? Which is what PhD students undergo in order to pass their examination. So he is being examined by the public, and more importantly, by the doctors of the law. So then when the critic heard the commentary, he calmed down and said, "After this, I will no longer cast aspersions on any of the people of this Sufi path for the way that they talk about things in ordinary language, or for their claim that they are indicating divine knowledges to which they customarily refer with these expressions." So then Ibn al-Arabi comments on that and says what he thought was good and he benefited from the experience. Uh, now, we are talking about love and love poetry, right? So it's appropriate to mention this story as well. Um, so Ibn al-Arabi is doing tawaf around the Kaaba. Now, for Ibn al-Arabi, in his eyes, the Kaaba, like everything else in the universe, is a living being that speaks and listens. This means, this means he was not surprised when one day it called out to him and demanded that he perform the ritual tawaf around it at the same time as the spring of Zamzam insisted on him drinking its water. He specifies that both the Kaaba and Zamzam pronounced their requests quite audibly, so he could hear with his own ears. Afraid that, now, Ibn Arabi tells us, as his excuse, I guess, afraid that their dignity would veil his own proximity to God, the Sheikh countered with a polite refusal in poetic form. According to him, the rank of the Kaaba is a locus of epiphany, as a place of tajalli for the essential realities, for the haqa'iq al-dhatiyya was, in spite of its unquestionable nobility, inferior to his own reality as what insan kama. The Kaaba was hurt by these words, and the house determined to avenge itself. Yes, it wanted to take revenge on Ibn Arabi. So, one cold and rainy night in the year 600 or 1204, Ibn Arabi, so by the way, he's 40 years old here, yeah? And this is important for another reason. We'll come to it in a second. Ibn Arabi had rashly ventured alone into the Haram to perform the tawaf when the Kaaba threatened to crush him. When I came level with the drain pipe behind the black stone, I looked at the Kaaba. It seemed to have hitched up its veils, risen from its foundations, and be bracing itself, ready to brace itself to eject me when I reached the what's called the Syrian corner of the Kaaba, because each corner points to a different country, right? Like Syria, Iraq, and so on, and Yemen. So when I reached the Syrian corner, so as to prevent me from making the tawaf, it started threatening me in words that I heard with my ears. I was terrified. God revealed to me such displeasure and anger on the Kaaba's part that I was quite incapable of leaving. I hid behind what's called the wall, which I assume is a fixture that's been removed in modern times. But these fixtures that were removed, they have like sacred value or important historical value. I hid behind the wall to take cover against its blows, using the wall as a shield that I interposed between it and myself. By God, I heard it telling me, "Come on then, come forward so that I can show you what I'm going to do to you, how you have debased my rank and elevated the rank of the son of Adam. You have attributed to the knowers of God, the Gnostics, the Arifin, pre-excellence over me. Through the power of him who alone holds power, I will not permit you to perform the tawaf around me." I meditated for a moment and understood that God had wanted to teach me a lesson, and I thanked him for it. From that moment onwards, the fear I had experienced on seeing it hitch up its veils, just as someone hitches up his clothing when preparing to jump, that fear simply vanished. I improvised some verses for it to appease the wrath I perceived in it or her. The more I spoke her phrases, the more she eased up and sank back down to its foundations. It seemed pleased with what it heard me say, and finally returned to her normal state. She reassured me and said I could complete the tawaf. And that is how his book, the Taj al-Rasa'il, of other love poems, were born. And this is also perhaps the year he gets married, but not to Nizam, but to the daughter of the keeper of the Kaaba. But before that, I think it's worth mentioning this. Before that, in his previous years, he used to keep away from women physically. But the only problem with this is that Muhammad said, "Three things of this world of yours were made lovable to me: women, perfume, and the coolness of my eyes and the ritual prayer." So Ibn Arabi tells us, commenting on this hadith, "I used to dislike women and sexual intercourse as much as anyone when I first entered this path." And of course, you'll remember, what was he? He was upon the heart of Isa, Christ alayhi salam, on the path of Sayyidina Isa, Jesus. So he was Christic in his mode of spirituality, which meant he was naturally averse to the company of women in that mode of spirituality. Uh, so then Ibn Arabi says, "I stayed that way for about 18 years until I witnessed this station, which is the Muhammadan station. Before that, I had feared the divine displeasure because of this, since I had come across the prophetic report that God made women lovable to his prophet. For he did not love them because of nature. He loved them because God had made them lovable to him." So what is that? That's a divine love. Not a natural love, a divine love. Then he says, "When I was sincere toward God in turning my attentiveness toward him, in that, because of my fear of his displeasure, since I disliked what God had made lovable to his prophet, that dislike disappeared from me. Praise belongs to God. So then he made them lovable to me. And I am now the greatest of creatures and care for them, and the most observant of their rights. For in this I'm upon insight. This derives from my being made to love. This is not a love deriving from nature. He who knows the measure of women and their mystery will not renounce love for them. On the contrary, one of the perfections of the Gnostic is love for women, for this is a prophetic heritage and a divine love. The Prophet Muhammad said, "Were made lovable to me." Hence, he ascribed his love for them only to God. So ponder this chapter. You will see wonders. And he really lives up to his word. Because when you look at his writings on women in general, especially throughout the Futuhat, they really are quite generous. And I have to point this out. So it appears that he gets married when he turns 40, which is what? The year of being 40 years old is when Prophet Muhammad receives his revelation, which really aligns with that year quite nicely. So then Ibn Arabi says, uh, well, I mean, he most probably got married in Mecca, right? We're not entirely certain, but in any case, at least one of his wives, Maryam, shared his spiritual aspirations. So this could be the woman he married, Maryam bint Abdun. And so he describes her. He says, "My saintly wife Miriam said to me, in my sleep, I saw someone who often comes to visit me in my visions, but whom I have never met in the world of sense perception. He asked me, 'Do you aspire to the way?' I replied, 'Most certainly, yes, but I don't know how to reach it.' So he said, 'Through five qualities, namely through trust, certainty, patience, resolution, and sincerity.'" And now this is another wife whom Ibn Arabi marries, and it's worth mentioning this episode when they are doing their marriage contract. So he says, "When I desired a marriage contract with my wife, the marriage broker whom I commissioned asked her, 'Would you care to specify to us something for your marriage dowry, right? Which is the mahr.' To which she answered, 'May that which marriage makes due be brought close or brought nigh.'" So this is quite a mysterious sentence. So then the marriage broker, not knowing what she meant by that, says, "You are a woman of honorable rank, the sister of a great ruler. So she has some standing. And it is necessary that your dowry, your mahr, be commensurate with your rank. It should be of the same portion of your rank. So you can ask for a higher mahr if you want." So then she replied, "The suitor who acts thus is one who has worth and standing in his own soul. As for the woman, if she is allotted anything beyond that which marriage makes due, she must have been granted the measure that she has in her own soul. And my soul, God knows best, in my view, is too lofty than that this world and the next could provide the equivalent of its measure." So in other words, it's as if the marriage broker is saying, in other words, tell us your worth. And she's replying, you don't know my worth. You don't know my worth. Because it's beyond what you can imagine. For I am not something insignificant in my soul. So if in my dowry there is you write nothing, but what marriage makes due, then let it be known most certainly that that is not my measure. On the contrary, I mean to claim high honor, I do, but my measure will always remain unknown. You'll never know what I'm worth because you can't imagine what I'm worth. So the broker and the jurors, their jaws probably dropped and were astonished by the nobility of her high-mindedness. So then Ibn Arabi meets another female saint, you could say, or even a murida perhaps, because she's at the beginning of her path. And she's called one of the muradun, which is one of the categories of saints. So Ibn Arabi sees her in Mecca, and he tells us how she was being whipped by her father unjustly, but felt no pain at all by God's grace. She heard the noise caused by the whip, but felt as if there was a veil in front of the whip, hindering its direct contact with her body, which is one of the miracles. So it's basically a miracle, a karama. And so Ibn Arabi states that these are the kinds of miracles that happen at the beginning of the way. He himself also experienced such things at the beginning. Now, it's really interesting to note what is his attitude towards women with regard to social situations. So this is what he says, and he criticizes men for this. One of the Prophet's companions invited him for food. So the Prophet replied, me and her. And he points to Aisha. So do you mean both of us? So the man replies, no, just you. So the Prophet refused the invitation. Finally, the person favored him by asking her to come along with him. So the Prophet and Aisha accepted to go to the man's house. So then Ibn Arabi is continuing his critique. He says, God says, you have a beautiful model in God's messenger. This is the verse in the Quran. So the word is uswatun hasana. In the messenger of God, in the Rasulullah, lakum uswatun hasana. You have a beautiful example in the messenger of God. So Ibn Arabi then says, where is your faith? If nowadays you were to see a man of dignity, a judge, a preacher, a vizier, a sultan, doing something of the sort so as to follow this model, would you ascribe to him anything but low character traits, base character traits? But if this attribute were not one of the noble character traits that God's messenger, who was raised up to complete the noble character traits, that's from a hadith, he himself would not have done it if it weren't a noble character trait. So it is. And then Ibn Arabi continues, God's messenger was preaching on Friday from the pulpit, and he saw that Hassan and Hussein were coming forward in the khutbah for Yom al-Jum'ah, for the Salat al-Jum'ah, tripping on their clothes. He did not restrain himself from descending from the pulpit, picking them up and carrying them while he went back up to the pulpit and continued with the khutbah, with the sermon. Do you consider this to be an imperfection in his state? No, by God. That derived from the perfection of his knowledge, just as inviting women to attend social gatherings is also from the perfection of his knowledge. For he saw with which eye he looked at, and at whom he looked at whom he looked in a way that was absent from the blind, those who do not see. In other words, he saw with the divine eye. They are the ones who say concerning these sorts of acts, did he have no occupation with God to keep him from the like of this? But he, by God, occupied himself only with God. So only the ignorant say, what's he doing? Is he distracted? But he's not distracted. Why? Because so he sees the face of God in Hassan and Hussein, so he picks them up, and he sees the face of God in his wife, and so he takes her out to the social gatherings. And each person has their own divine value, right? Now, so and this is a long subject, so I'm just gonna keep it short here, because there's actually more to say. So Ibn Arabi in Mecca has another vision, and it is a strange vision, but an interesting one involving the Kaaba again. So, in a vision in which I performed the circulation around the Kaaba, God showed me a group of people I did not know. They recited to me two verses of which I only remember one. One of them, who had a name I had never heard the like of, said to me, I am one of your ancestors. I asked him, how long ago have you been dead? He replied, around 40,000 years. I pointed out to him that even Adam himself had not lived so long ago. He said, which Adam are you referring to? The one nearest to you, or another one? Then I remembered a saying of the Prophet that God had created 100,000 Adams. And this, of course, this is not a hadith that's known in the hadith collections. It's probably transmitted orally. And then he meets seven saints too in Mecca, between the wall of the Hanabila, the Hanbalis, and the bench of Zamzam. And then he says, they were indeed the elect of God. So overwhelmed were they by holy tranquility, sakina, and awe that they did not even blink their eyes. When I met them, they were in a state of contemplation. No word passed between me and them on any matter, but I saw in them an almost unimaginable calm. And so it was also here again around the Kaaba. He meets Ahmed al-Sabti, the son of Harun al-Rashid, in the same year, 599. And if you're thinking, well, Harun al-Rashid is dead because he precedes by Ibn Arabi many years during the era of the Abbasids, you would be correct. So this is what happened. One Friday at Mecca, after the communal prayer, I had started performing the tawaf when I saw a man of fine bearing, with a serious and impressive appearance, who was doing the ritual circulations in front of me. I looked at him a little closer to see if perhaps he was someone I knew, but I became aware that he was not a resident of Mecca. Also, from his relaxed expression and vigor, that he had not just arrived after a journey. Then I saw him pass between two men who were holding on to each other as they performed the tawaf. He went through them without separating them and without them noticing anything. So I started following him step by step, placing my feet just where he had put his. Every time he lifted his foot from one particular spot, I immediately put down my foot in the same place. Focusing my awareness on him, I did not let him out of my sight because I didn't want to lose him. I passed between the same two men. They were still holding on to each other, whom he had passed through, and I had got ahead of them in turn, just as he had, without separating them. So I went right through them, and this amazed me. When he had completed the seven circumambulations and when was preparing to leave, I grabbed him and greeted him. He returned my greeting with a smile, while I kept my eyes fastened on him out of fear of losing him. Why does he keep saying that? Because this is clearly a ruh, a spirit. So the rules with arwah is that if you move your gaze, even for a moment, then the spirit leaves. But it is your gaze that locks the spirit in place. I had begun to suspect that he was a spirit who had assumed a body, and I knew that being looked at bound him. I said to him, I know you are a spirit who has taken a body. Then it replied, you are correct. Who are you? I asked him. I am al-Sabti ibn Harun al-Rashid. I would like to, then Ibn Arabi says, I would like to ask you some questions about your spiritual state when you were in this lower world. So then the Sabti replies, ask me your questions. Then Ibn Arabi says, I gather that you were called al-Sabti because you used to work on Saturdays, Yom al-Sabt. So he's called al-Sabti, to obtain food for the rest of the week. What you have been told is correct. Then why do you choose Saturday rather than some other day of the week? So then he replies, a pertinent question. I had learned that God began the creation of the world on a Sunday and completed it on a Friday, and that when Saturday arrived, he rested, placing one leg on the other, saying, I am the sovereign, which is a weird statement to make because, of course, in Islam, God does not rest. Um, if I'm not mistaken, this would appear to be like it resembles, right, what is contained in Judaism, for example, right? Uh, so that's an interesting kind of tashbih. So then he says, this is what I had been told when I was alive. I said to myself, I would do the same. So from Sunday through to the sixth day, I devoted myself to the worship of God. Um, you know, Allah الحي القيوم لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم. Slumber, nor neither slumber, sleep, nor weariness overtakes him. But okay, so this would appear to be like a metaphorical thing. So then he said, uh, "This is what I've been told when I was alive." So I said to myself, I would do the same. So from Sunday through to the sixth day, I devoted myself to the worship of God, saying to myself, just as He concerned Himself with using during those 6 days, uh, I will dedicate myself to the. Sorry, it's not using. Just as He concerned Himself with those 6 days, with the creation of the 6 days, I will dedicate myself to the worship of Him during those 6 days, entirely to Him, without concerning myself with the satisfaction of my individual soul. But on Saturdays, I busied myself with my soul and obtained for it what it needed to survive for the rest of the week. And and at that moment, and at that state, God granted me an illumination. And I asked him, who was the Qutb? Who was the pole of your time? He replied, it was I. There is nothing and there is nothing in that to cause pride. So things were going well for Ibn Arabi, but towards the end of the 6th Islamic century, that is in 1203, Yemen, uh, actually, no, wait, before I do that, yes, Yemen was plunged into darkness by a wind of ashes and cinder, and there was a shower of comets that danced in the eastern skies. So Ibn Arabi tells us, I was finishing the ritual tawaf when I and the rest of those circulating the Kaaba noticed them. People were stunned. Never had anyone seen a night with so many comets. They lasted throughout the night until the break of day. There were so many of them that they bumped into each other like sparks from a fire, and the stars could no longer be seen. When we saw this, we said to each other that it must be heralding an event of some gravity. So this was an omen, right? So Ibn Arabi continues, soon afterwards, we were informed that an incident had occurred in Yemen at exactly the same time we were witnessing this phenomenon. A wind of dust, similar to zinc, had borne down on the inhabitants of Yemen. It was so dense that it covered the earth to knee height. The people were terrified, all the more so because the atmosphere had become so dark that they needed lanterns to be able to walk about during the day. In fact, there was such an agglomeration of dust clouds that the light of the sun could not reach them. And also, people in Zabid heard a terrible noise coming from the sea. This happened in the year 600 or 599. Ibn Arabi is not sure which one. But everyone experienced these events, both in the Hijaz and in Yemen. And during that same year, we also witnessed other amazing things. It was in that year that the plague struck the inhabitants of Ta'if so completely that nobody was spared. It lasted from the start of the month of Rajab through to the start of the month of Ramadan. This plague that swept down on them was of such a kind that when the first symptoms appeared, either the patient died within 5 days, or after the 5 days had elapsed, his life was spared. At that time, Mecca was filled with people from Ta'if who had abandoned their homes without even closing the doors, leaving their possessions and livestock in the fields. So, these were serious omens, and bad times were coming. The Reconquista in the west, the Franks in the east, the Turks sweeping through Iran. There was no need to be a prophet to predict dark days for the Muslims. The Caliph had a premonition of what was coming and tried to stir up the conscience of the princes to restore the unity of the Muslim community, but perhaps too late. The die had been cast. The cataclysm was soon to arrive from the far reaches of the Asiatic steppes. The Mongol hordes were coming and would wipe out the caliphate in 1258. So Ibn Arabi admits that one evening in Mecca, he experienced a spell of despondency and depression in the face of the weakness of his students and felt like leaving them so that he could concentrate on himself alone. When I realized that those who truly enter the path are rare indeed, I lost courage and decided to devote my efforts in future to myself alone and abandon men to their fate. The temptation was selfish but human. Nevertheless, Ibn Arabi did not yield to it. That same night, he saw himself in a dream facing God on the day of judgment. And he says, I was standing in front of my Lord, head lowered, and fearing he would punish me for my negligence. But he said to me, O servant of mine, fear nothing. Don't worry. All I ask of you is that you counsel my servants. So after being given this vision, I taught men, pointing out to them the plain way and the dangers to be feared, addressing myself to all, jurists, dervishes, Sufis, and simple believers. So this gives a new dimension to the seal of the saints, not not just to preserve the sacred sciences for the elite, but to give guidance to all beings, whether they be kings, jurists, Gnostics, or simple believers, following in the footsteps of the prophet who was sent to all men. And certain aspects of his teachings can only be addressed to the elite, but his message as a whole is for everyone. And ever since the death of the master of lovers, the Prophet Muhammad, the sacred teachings were passed on orally. Now that borders are changing, the old world is staggering, it was time to consign these teachings to writing, which is what he was doing with the Futuhat, the repository of sacred sciences beyond the vicissitudes of history, transmitting it for future generations. And so with the next session, we come on to the second final session of the biography of the Sheikh Al-Akbar, and we're going to continue his travels, and he's going to continue all the way to Iraq and Turkey and to all the places in Turkey. So to Konya and to Haran and to Siwas and other places as well. And so we encounter further autobiographical details of the Sheikh Al-Akbar. I apologize, I did not update the slide. But we're going to come across more details and even his strange meeting with the sun worshippers, which is what happens in Turkey. And we're going to come across more biographical details of his family. And then next time, he'll describe to us the hardest night of his life. And he'll describe more things that happened to him and his family and the trials that happen along the way. So thank you very much, and we'll just stop right there.
Alhamdulillah, shukran. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. And we'll go on to questions now, inshallah. I apologize. I know that there's a whole host of comments I have not seen. Can either Joshua or Allah please take a look at them, or if anyone wants to raise their hands, go ahead and raise your hands. And we'll take some questions for about 15 minutes, inshallah.
Yeah, I can take a look at them. So Hayal is asking, is it remotely possible that the Israelites have made their way into Ibn Arabi's writings?
Of course it's possible. In fact, he likes them. Some of them have very nice and interesting stories and sayings, but it's not the question of whether they made his way into his writings or not. Ibn Arabi is a muhaddith. He's a very serious muhaddith, which means he's memorized thousands upon thousands upon thousands of hadith. He knows their chains of transmission. He's memorized all 6 major collections, what are called the Sihah al-Sitta, plus Muwatta Malik, plus he knew the Sunan of Bayhaqi and Tabarani. He's a major muhaddith. It is the one science he surpasses in, even though he's good in the other sciences as well. But he especially surpasses in excellence the sciences of hadith. In fact, his stepson becomes the muhaddith, the master muhaddith of his day and age, right? So if you find Isra'iliyat in Ibn Arabi's writings, it's on purpose. They didn't make his way into his writings. He puts them there on purpose, and he has no problem with it.
Okay, yeah. Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Faris. That was my main question. Did they make it their way to his writings? But thanks for clarifying.
Allah barak fik. And I do not know who the Khalifa during that time, those dark times were. That's a good question. Let me look that up and put it in the chat. Yeah, so you know what? So my understanding is that yes, Sayyidina Isa Islam was celibate according even to our own tradition. Yes, but then when Sayyidina Isa Islam comes back at the end of time, when he returns at the end of time, he marries. Why? Because now he's under the Sharia of Muhammad Islam, where one marries. Salah ad-Din, no, Salah ad-Din would have passed away at that time. So actually, Ibn Arabi will meet Salah ad-Din's son, actually, or nephew. It's his son or nephew, Malik al-Dhahr, and he's going to meet him in the next session. But the actual Khalifa of the time, I'll need to like just double check.
Can I ask a question about the
Yeah.
pots? When the pot
Yes.
when the pot broke, and it was like a metaphor of how our heart should break for God. I didn't understand that. I thought it was very beautiful. And then I was confused about, like, our heart is very beautiful. When we're like open to
So
God's will.
yeah.
Explain it.
So obviously those teachers, Abu al-Abbas Hariri and his companion, did not understand the purpose of the pot breaking, right? They thought the pot said, "Don't make me a place for filth," right? Don't use me for going to the bathroom, right? So Ibn Arabi said, no. The same thing has happened to other people who are better than you. That's not what he's saying. What the pot is saying is that the pot is a metaphor for your heart, right? So do not let your heart contain filth. What is filth? That which is other than God. That which is other than God. And then it broke as a sign that you should be broken-hearted for God's sake.
Yeah, that's the part I didn't understand. Why should you be broken-hearted for God's sake? I understood the beginning, which is beautiful. Your heart should be
yes,
pure
yes.
and nice. Yeah, but why should you be broken-hearted? I mean,
not
your
just
heart
pure.
should be very full and full of love. Why should it be broken for God?
Okay, well, I mean, not just pure and nice, but it becomes a place where you contemplate God. It's not just about pure and nice, but it's also the site where you only contemplate God, which is what the heart should be doing, right? But why brokenhearted? Well, because it's a reference to a hadith Qudsi. It's a reference to a hadith Qudsi that says that Allah promises that He is with those who are brokenhearted for His sake.
So what does brokenhearted mean? I mean, like in pain, or can you just explain what does it mean to be brokenhearted for God?
It's like you said, it could mean that you are in pain, you are sad, you are in grief, right? But what does it mean to do it for God? It would mean for either in what's called the contemplation of God. This contemplation leads to that state in your heart, or you are doing something for God's sake that leads to you having a broken heart. It's whatever is for God's sake that leads to a broken heart. So, like a really simple example could be you, like, for example, I don't know, someone important to you passes away, and then one of the actions of the Sharia is to have sabr with that leaves you brokenhearted, right? That's being brokenhearted for his sake, and that's just one example, right? And there's many examples of being brokenhearted for his sake. Weeping because weeping because of your mistakes. Sorry.
So, like, if you have a problem, then you say I'll bear with it. I'll be patient because of God, not just to be miserable, so that God is happy with you. And it has a purpose. It has a purpose.
It has a purpose. But even if, like, for example, if anything makes you sad, but then you complain to God, that's being brokenhearted for his sake too. I just gave one example. There's like loads of examples.
Okay. But I'm sure also God wants our heart not to be broken sometimes.
It could be. It's just that for the Sufis, so we are talking about a spiritual path, right? The person who wants to take the spiritual path, it's not for everyone. The spiritual path is not for everyone. But the one who wants to take it, that's the shortest path to him. That's the shortest path. And by the way, there are other paths. It's not wrong to say that there are other paths. But it's one of the paths that tends to be praised and beloved to the Sufis. But there are other paths too.
Okay, just one last thing. So, because sometimes when my heart is not very happy or whatever, I just think, oh, I must be not close to God. Because if you're close to God, your heart should be full of love and, you know, like happier. So it seems to be, no, it's okay not to be, your heart to
No.
be pure. Is that right? Do I understand it right? Or
Yeah, it could be either way. You don't have to be in a lovey-dovey state in order for you to feel like you're close to God. No, it can be either
okay.
state. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
May
Can
I
I
add?
say something? Sorry for this. I think it's my understanding is the more you are in gratitude, and especially with the heart has expansion or degrees of expansion. So if it's like in a way in always like in divine love and always in ways of love, it always expands. So that's cause it to really ache in the expansion. Kind of. It's not really breaking. It's like the wording probably maybe has multi-meanings that we're not really encompassing in this. It's not broke because the heart has the meaning of rotation. It rotates.
تقلب.
Yes, exactly.
Mm.
So a rotation, that's it. In the expansion, it rotates even for a bigger and bigger. But obviously, the meaning in the rotation and I don't probably it's and to me is it has the expansion meaning, and in expansion there is always an expansion. There is type of a tawq, which is like tawq is like it came to my mind so many times when you are mentioning breaking the heart.
You are referring to something very interesting and specific. May I save it for another time because there's a lot to
Yes.
say about it.
Yeah.
But just very briefly, expansion and contraction. So you can find Allah in expansion, so you have gratitude, and you find Allah in contraction, so you have patience. He's found in both states. Now you can find what you're talking about, this tilq in expansion, which is you can find the opposite effect in the quality. I know what you mean, but let me explain it in the chat, whoever wants to hear about it, so we can move
Yes,
on to the
absolutely.
next question.
Thank you.
But yes, you can find him in expansion and contraction. Sahara, please, Bismillah.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Assalamu alaikum Dr. Faris.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
What brought my attention really actually the last couple of slides, especially the one for the you know what happened in Yemen and in Hijaz. And it was very interesting what you said about it. Actually, it appeared in the sky first, and then on ground, and then it's like as if it's science. So is it like as above, so below? So we witness it. Is it like have an order of that? Like, you know, like in the sky, you witness it in the sky first, and then on earth, and then when on like everything is connected and everything like as if it speaks to each other, and then they sense it before the human being see it, something like that, because it's
So the earth is speaking. The earth is speaking, and it needs a tarjuman to understand what she's saying. She is speaking, whether it's the comets in the sky, or it's what happened in the ground, the dust storm, and the noise they heard in the sea. If it did happen in that order, the order has meaning, but it does not have to happen in that order. So if something happened today, it could have a different order, and then you try to understand why was it in that order. And what does that order mean? And that needs a tarjuman for today.
Beautiful.
Who will understand what she is saying today?
Hmm.
But well, of course, like in general, they were like really massive omens, right? Yeah.
Beautiful. And the other one, because you were saying something about when he saw a sabit, and you said something so beautiful, but I couldn't really get it well. That he saw the spirit, and he would look the spirit if
Yeah.
he wants. Can you just
Yeah,
like
yeah. So arwah and the malaika. But arwah can come here wa yatajasadu. They can take on the form of a body. And then maybe some people can see them, maybe some people can't see them. This is the experience of Ibn Arabi, this is the experience of other awliya, and it's the experience of other people too. But there are rules. There are rules. Not just a ruh, but even other beings too. If they come here and they take on a body, and you see them, it's your sight that keeps them there. They can't move. I mean, they can move, but they can't leave. They can't go back. So if you want to talk to them, if it ever happens to anyone, your gaze has to stay fixed. So what they try to do is they try to move to the side so that your gaze moves. If your gaze loses them, they're gone.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you so much. And the last thing, sorry, there is
No, go ahead.
hadith, the last slide about the knowledge of Sayyidina Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. But it caught my, I don't know, it came into me the hadith. Please translate. أنا مدينة العلم وعلي بابها. سيدنا عليه السلام. I'm not really sure where is Ibn Arabi from this as well. I mean, that's it. Thank you.
I am the city of knowledge, and Sayyidina Ali alayhi salam, he is the gates to that city, right? So if you want to have ma'arif of Muhammad Rasulullah, you come through Sayyidina Ali. This is a true statement. I don't know what is the silsila, or that exact khabar or hadith, but the idea is completely true. But this does not negate the rank of the other Sahaba, like Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman, but Sayyidina Ali has also something special, for sure, yes. It is completely true. الله يبارك فيك.
جزاكم الله كل خير.
الله يبارك فيك. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, Doctor.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
Sahar's question really ties into what I wanted to ask about Sayyidina Ali when you said he was muttering.
Yes.
So what was he muttering, and how does Ibn Arabi present Sayyidina Ali in most of his talk and his books? Is he considered, since he said Babuha, is he considered a wali that has kashf? I know being from Al al-Bayt, does he have more of a kashf, or how has he been portrayed by Ibn Arabi? Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking. So Sayyidina Ali does have a special place, but he doesn't really get into it that much. There could be crossovers with, let's say, Shia Islam, but there may be small crossovers. They're not major crossovers. It's true that Imam Ali, for Ibn Arabi, it's completely obvious, even for other Sunnis and other Sufis and other Turaq. They believe that he had kushafat. It's very obvious he had kushafat. It's very obvious he had divine ma'rifah. He said, in this breast, I contain 70 divine knowledges. If only I could find someone to give them to, right? And he said, like, if you ask me to write a sharah of a tafsir of just Surah Fatiha, I would need 70 camels loaded with books just to give you the tafsir of Surah Fatiha.
Who says that? Ibn Arabi or Sayyidina Ali? Sorry.
Sayyidina Ali. Sayyidina Ali. So Ibn Arabi completely acknowledges that, and he completely believes in that. But he also believes that the other Sahaba had kushafat as well. It's not just Imam Ali.
Mhm.
So Umar ibn Khattab is called one of the muhaddathun, not muhaddithun, muhaddathun. Yani Allah talks to him.
Mm.
And Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he has his own kushafat. Uthman bin Affan, he has firasa. Sometimes he could tell what people's thoughts were. And the other Sahaba, not just them, other Sahaba had kushafat and spiritual unveilings as well. Many of them did. So Sayyidina Ali does not excel them in that particular manner. He excels them in a different manner from what Sahar was saying, that he is the bab or the gate to the city of knowledge, who is Rasulullah. There is something special about Ali being Ahlul Bayt as well, you're right. And he's from what's called the people of the cloak, right? When I think it's called the Mubahala happens, and then it's a verse in the Quran when the Christians come, and then there's a Rasulullah, he wraps his cloak around Ali and Hassan and Hussein and himself, and then he says, you bring your people, we'll bring my people, and we'll call upon God to testify which one of us is lying, right? So Sayyidina Ali has a special status, for sure, there's no doubt about it. And so do the Ahlul Bayt. For Shaykh Al-Akbar, he says that Ahlul Bayt, that means even the descendants, coming up to our day and beyond, of Imam Ali and Sayyidina Fatima, those children, he says they're maghfoor on the day of judgment, right? And he says that there's a reason for that because it's mentioned in the Quran, and there's a lot more that could be said about that.
Thank you very much. And so what was he muttering? Is that something that gets clarified, or what does that like symbolize that he was muttering in that image?
Yeah, I don't know. But the interesting symbolism was that he's sitting with Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam. So there's a correlation between him and Isa as well. I mean, by the way, even so, this isn't Ibn Arabi, but for the Shia Akbarians like Haydar Amuli, Imam Ali is the Khatam Walay al-Amma for Haydar Amuli. Ibn Arabi doesn't say that. So that means Haydar Amuli is disagreeing with Ibn Arabi. But there is something special about Imam Ali for sure, but I don't know what he was muttering. That's a good question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Mentioned, sorry, the word al-mubahala, the cloak.
Yes. Of course, Mubahal doesn't mean cloak. It's the trial.
الأصل like the origin of the word is what? Sorry?
It's
مباح. I wrote it down. Is it correct the way I wrote it down in the chat?
if I'm not mistaken, but let me double check. If I'm not mistaken, yes.
The cloak. The people of the cloak.
Yeah, but the word means it's the trial, the trial, like the ibtila. It's a trial. Because what happens is that it's actually a divine challenge to a Christian delegation that came to Rasul, and they said Isa is Allah. Rasul said no, he's not Allah. So let's call upon God and see which one of us is correct. That's called the mubahala.
Okay, with a hey. Okay, thank you so much.
Yes. Allah barak fikum. Maybe let's take a couple more questions. If they're still in the chat, can we copy them into the chat room so I can answer them later on?
Assalamu alaikum. Could I ask a question, Dr. Faris?
Yes, of course. Walaikum salam. Bismillah.
So I also was wondering about like just the first question about being brokenhearted, and someone wrote in the chat, and that's the only way that I could understand it, is just about like how it would be a phase of like the separation of the reed from the reed bed, because eventually in the Quran, isn't it? I mean, doesn't Allah say that إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ, and salim means whole and complete and not broken, which is the opposite of broken. So I was just wondering about that.
I mean, but you're arguing that Salim, the state of being Salim, is opposite to being Munkasar. What if the opposite of being Salim is Fasad? What if that's the opposite? That's, I think, the way I would see it, because I've never seen anyone criticize the state of being brokenhearted. Like, if you actually, there's like a pseudo hadith, I think, that says, like, it's from Andalusia, that says, like, if you die brokenhearted, loving someone, but you didn't get to be with that person, you're a martyr, right? So it's a very praiseworthy state, being brokenhearted. That's why the Sufis love it. And the ones who are brokenhearted for God's sake, for his sake alone, then they're gathered in his shade on the day of judgment. And their qalb is salim from fasad, from corruption. At least that's how I understood it. What do you think?
I don't know. It's just like when you say broken, I mean, Josh said that it could mean like open-hearted, but I feel like open-hearted it still feels good, you know, but broken-hearted doesn't feel good. Like it's not a pleasing state to be in. Whereas, and even like if you just go to the root of Salim, it's coming from Salam, which is God, and you can't really attribute brokenness to God, and you want to embody Salim, then you can't be like, oh, like, you know, I was brokenhearted in someone's separation. Or even if that's God, like that's not a divine state. I feel like that's just the metaphor, like it's not working for me.
Okay.
I think
Well,
it's I think it's a matter of terminology. I think this is Sufi terminology that it's not exactly what comes to mind first when you think of broken. Wallahu alam.
You know, guys, you know, it's interesting that I'm seeing this interpretation of the word. You know, thank you for telling me. I didn't know that's how it's perceived sometimes by some people. Of course, the brokenness is not attributed to God; it's attributed to you, because you're the one that's broken, not him, right? But I can see it as a really good thing when it's for his sake, right? I can see it as a good thing. Maybe reading some more accounts of Sufis of how they're brokenhearted might clear that up. Because it's the brokenness. I mean, you know, Maulana Rumi says, like, when you're wounded, that's where the light enters from the wound, right? When you're crying, right? You know, what's dropping are drops of pearls, right? Extraordinary spiritual states come from being broken-hearted. If it's not a good thing, then it must come from the English word. But if you actually understand what's being said by inkisar al-qalb, if you don't like the idea of being inkisar al-qalb, then there must be a misunderstanding. Because the opposite of someone who is, I'm talking about the exact opposite. I don't mean anyone here, but it's exact extreme opposite. Is someone who has a calcified heart. Calcified? Like stone, like hardness. That's a horrible state to be in. And I can think of some people who are like that in politics today and around the world. When your heart's like stone and you don't care about what's happening to anyone else, that's the opposite state. When your heart's like stone, and then the Quran criticizes that and says, how is it that your hearts are like rocks? No, Bella, harder than rocks. Because there are rocks that weep. Who are the rocks that weep? The water that you see in rivers flowing through rocks. There are rocks that weep, metaphorically, but also literally. If you take it into account that in Arabic everything's alive, there are rocks that weep. So how come there's some rocks that weep, but then there are hearts of politicians and people in this world who don't weep for people suffering, right? So having a broken heart is a sign of the heart being truly well and alive, and alive, whereas the calcified heart is a dead heart. That's how I understood it. Yumna, yes.
Would it also be that when we become brokenhearted, هي حالة الخشوع, that we go down and appeal to God's help and connection to God with what we're tested from? So it is our gate to more faith and connectivity. So it's a good thing to when we are in the mihna, because this is bringing us closer to Allah. So this is how I see being broken as a good thing. It's not something negative, because this is what's bringing me to shed all the masks and through this test that I'm going through to bring me the faraj to being closer to God and to always resort to Him.
Absolutely.
Can I add something? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, qulub was always mentioned relation of على قلوب أقفالها is always for the like امتحان or the trial. But Fuad is the one who's already in encompassing the divine love. So these are stages, I think. So in order for the qulub, it's like to really grow into the other state, it's like this is why the expansion and the constant learning, التزكية or the clearance of the heart in my some of the understanding.
Could
So
be, could
between the
be.
two words, because the two words are like literally mentioned in Quran several times, the difference between them.
Oh, sure. Yes. Yes. It could be, you know what I would say? So I'm going to finish this off because it's a wonderful discussion that'll continue. What Mary would say is, you know what? Find out for yourselves. Test it out and see what you find. Because the most important thing isn't what I tell you. The most important thing is what do you discover? What realities do you discover through these things, these ideas, these terms? What do you find? And we'll leave it at that, inshallah. Thank you so much. Allah barak fikum. Wonderful seeing you. And I'll see you guys next week, inshallah. If there are any questions I didn't answer, please put them in the chat. I do want to answer them. Thank you so much, guys, and see you. Sam.
Thank you, Dr. Faris.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. جزاكم الله كل خير.
Allah barak fikum. And Allah barak fikum. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.